Sure, we all know that Q4 is important, but I did want to quickly touch on just kind of giving the scope of the significance of what Q4 is going to bring for us. Last year, if we look at all of the online sales that Amazon produced throughout the year, 38% of those total sales came in the fourth quarter, right? So that's a total of 187 billion across the online store channel that Amazon brought in revenue within Q4. That means as a seller, on a standard level, 38% of our revenue is probably coming in Q4. And for some categories, the percentage is probably even higher as you think about things that people are gifting or really waiting on deals for and things like that. Before I jump into the agenda and what we will be walking through today a little bit more in depth, I just want to give you guys a quick highlight about who I am, who Intentwise is, for those of you who may not be familiar. So my name is Kenton. I'm the product evangelist here at Intentwise. Intentwise is a data and ad solution for retail media sellers selling on Amazon, Walmart, and a few other platforms like Instacart. We kind of hit three main buckets, the first of which is going to be our ad optimizer tool, where we're going to help you analyze your data specifically from an advertising function, find opportunities, and take actions, whether those be automated or manual, against your advertising campaigns to help you speed up that time to action within your ad strategy. And then we have our analytics cloud solution, which is going to house all of your data from different data sources like your ads, Seller Central, your Vendor Central into one place, and then help you visualize that so you have easy to consume data insights, which we'll touch on a little bit more later. And then Intentwise Explore is our Amazon marketing cloud solution, where you will be able to take the SQL out of pulling Amazon marketing cloud campaign or queries. We'll have a library of queries and audiences already pre-built for you, so you can execute them out of the box and get those activated against your campaign, which we'll have a couple points that we'll touch on again today as well. So if you have any more questions about any of these tools, please feel free to reach out to me after today's session, and happy to dive more into these as well. One last point I wanted to call out is we also have a Intentwise community. So we'll be walking through some things today, but we're consistently doing things to help educate you guys about what's going on in the industry, what are things you can be thinking about and preparing for. So our community webinars are one great place for that, but our community is another great place. So we should be seeing a link in the chat to join there. Would really encourage you guys to jump in there and see what we have going on there as well. I will jump in to our agenda today. Really, as we think about how we're preparing for Q4, we're going to kind of fall into four main buckets. The first of which is going to be optimizing campaigns. Then we'll talk about content, finding new growth opportunities, and then setting up a reporting stack so that we can have success in Q4. Sure, we all know that Q4 is important, but I did want to quickly touch on just kind of giving the scope of the significance of what Q4 is going to bring for us. Last year, if we look at all of the online sales that Amazon produced throughout the year, 38% of those total sales came in the fourth quarter, right? So that's a total of 187 billion across the online store channel that Amazon brought in revenue for within Q4. That means as a seller, right, on a standard level, 38% of our revenue is probably coming in Q4. And for some categories like apparel, for an example, or electronics, even that percentage is probably even higher as you think about things that people are gifting or really waiting on deals for and things like that. As we know, shoppers are very deal driven and spend time comparison shopping during this time frame. They're going to look at your product versus another one, weigh price differences, weigh feature differences a little heavier as people are really in that get a bargain mindset. Purchase windows are going to compress as shoppers really focus on waiting for those peak deal periods. People are going to wait till your October Prime, your Black Friday to make a bulk of their purchases. And then you'll have those last minute shoppers in the early December as well. And then competition increases leading to higher cost per click, kind of emphasizes the need for optimizing our budgets and bids, right? So while you're probably increasing your budgets in Q4, so are your competitors. So we want to make sure that we are really focused in on optimizing our bids and budgets in this quarter specifically, which we'll talk about how we can prepare for in September so that we can overcome this competition difference. One question that we got is, do we have a breakdown of sales by category? We don't. So there isn't any Amazon official data that I've seen that's been put out about what percentage of sales break down by category. We know that you're going to see influxed in apparel and electronics and some of those types of categories, which see heavy gifting periods. And there's some third-party softwares and reports that have come out about which of these categories are the most purchased. But from an Amazon official data perspective, we really just know, what is that top line percentage that's coming during that period. Awesome. So let's kind of break down into specifically thinking about our ads as we get started, right? So the first thing we need to think about is budgets, right? Your budget's probably going to be up for your ad spend in Q4, right? I think most people's are, but just because we're spending more doesn't mean we just spend like haywire, right? You're still going to run into budget constraints because of that increased traffic that we typically see, right? Your cost per clicks are going to be up because of that increased competition. and there's going to be increased traffic, so there's more opportunity for spending. So we still want to make sure that we're very focused in on what we have from a performance perspective as it comes to budgeting. So to do that, I'd recommend looking at Q4 of last year's data. If you don't have that data, we could look at our recent time frames to kind of make some similar inferences. But if we have data from last year, that's where I would start to look, right? So the two places that I would look at when it comes to budgeting on a campaign level, there's two or three things we could look at. One, look at things down to an hourly level, right? So if you're not currently utilizing any type of day parting strategy, Q4 is a great place to start to test this as you probably start to run into budget constraints. I wouldn't. The first step I would do is, if you have Amazon marketing stream data, is to look at where or what campaigns and what time of day you're seeing things run out of budget, right? So if I'm seeing that I have maybe 100 different campaigns in my account and there were 50 of them in particular that weren't lasting in budget throughout the day, let me see, okay, what time of budget were they on average running out of during that day? And then what was their performance, right? I don't necessarily need to push more budget to a campaign that wasn't performing. So if I see, maybe I have a segment of those that where 30 campaigns are high performing and we're running out of budget. Well, within those campaign segments, I probably should test some type of day parting strategy, pushing those dollars more towards when I was seeing that performance. So then I could break down on an hourly level as to, which hours are driving the most revenue, which hours are driving the best cost per click, and I could push my dollars more towards that by decreasing and increasing my bids throughout the day. So that's the first step of what I would look at when it comes to budgeting as we think about a further breakdown than just spending our budget. However, and the second one would be splitting our budget in different campaigns, right? So we're talking about within one campaign, when I have my budget for that campaign, how could I segment it throughout a day, a week? The second level is splitting between the individual campaigns, right? So this is, again, where I can go back and look at last year's performance and really identify the targets that were doing well for me, right? Was I doing best against competitor targets? Was I doing best against branded campaigns? Was I doing best in auto campaigns? Really identify where those success points were for you last year and make sure that those specifically we have allocated to have as close to 100% in time of budget as possible, really identifying what those opportunities are before we move into Q4. And then the third of those is going to be a split within the quarter itself, right? We talked about those compressed time windows. So we're heavily going to see that most of our purchases are going to come in those October Prime Day or those October deal days, the Black Friday, Cyber Monday window, and then those 2 weeks or so before Christmas where things really start to ramp up. And so if you have all of your Q4 data, I can really go in and see, okay, for each of those segments, not only how was performance within each segment, what campaigns were driving the best performances in each segment, right? I might see during a heavy deal period like Black Friday that competitor targets do really well. I think that's something you would typically see because competition is really high. So a lot of search terms have really high CPC, but people are more intently deal shopping or price shopping in between different competitors versus making an impulse purchase, where I might see that, by targeting similar competitors that I might have a better deal than, a better price than. I see a lot of people come from their product to my product and also have a cheaper cost per click, avoiding a lot of high competitive search terms. That might be different versus, a week before Christmas where people are just trying to get that last second purchase. They get, gifts in time, where maybe I do really good on an auto campaign, just trying to get really good coverage across a lot of keywords, or I do really good on my non-branded keywords. So you want to really identify for each of these different timeframes that we're looking at, how should I split my budget within them from a top line perspective, but then deeper within that top line budget split within each period, which campaigns are going to be my highest drivers of performance. So a couple steps that we can work through over the next month as we start to plan how are we going to spend our budget across campaigns, both within intraday budget changes and budget changes across the larger scope of the quarter. So that's most of what we have to think about on budgets. But then the next level we would move down to is keywords. Even within a single campaign, we're going to have most of the time a broader set of keywords that we might have opportunities to adjust within. So instead of just, again, like we talked about with budgets, just going through and increasing your spend increase your bids by 25% across all your keywords, we can kind of do this a little bit more strategically by looking again at last year's data, right? So I can come in here and see during last year, and again, I do this similar breakdown of looking at, how did October do? How did Black Friday do? How did those pre-holiday days do? And I really see which search terms are driving the highest revenue and the highest conversion rate for me. And by search term, I mean the keyword targets that we're looking at. And I would take this a step further and actually roll this up by keyword. I think what you could notice, I would want to look at things on both levels, right? Because there could be some keywords and product associations that are very strong versus the keyword as a whole. But it could also be interesting if you have keywords that exist in multiple places throughout your account to see how is this keyword's performance overall, right? You might see that the top spending place for that keyword to show up did really well, but there was also 10 other places where it showed up that it did poorly. And if you add those all together, then the keyword's maybe not as strong, right? So that doesn't mean I'd get rid of that keyword, but maybe I only focus it on the product that it was doing strong for. So you want to look at it on those two different levels, right? The second level I'm going to look at it on is segmenting between branded and non-branded terms. Brand protection, I think, is a strategy that has a little bit of mixed opinions on it, specifically as it comes to Q4, right? As you see increased traffic, you might be running some off Amazon campaigns that are driving traffic into Amazon. Do you want to make sure you're protecting your brand, or do you want to push those dollars because budget's already tight to other segments? So I would go back and see in last year, how much did I spend on branded versus non-branded, right? And what was my performance difference there? If I see that, branded is vastly outperforming my non-branded campaigns, then I probably want to make sure that I have really strong coverage on branded. And that's where I could go back to the campaign level and see within those campaigns, what was my out of budget percentage? How much time was running out of budget, right? And bring that back into my keyword strategy to make sure that I'm increasing my budgets and bids against those keywords, right? I might also see that, the needed cost per click for those isn't as high because I have that brand relevance. That might be another reason to push more spend there, but not have to increase budgets or bids as much, right? And same thing on the non-branded level. I'm probably going to notice within that segment that there's different places or different keywords that have strong differences in performance. And that can help me set up which segment of keywords has a 25% bid increase, which segment of keywords has a 10% bid increase over their normal rates. So if you notice that a keyword did really well last year, obviously we'd be okay with a little bit of a higher cost per click. So really getting down and breaking down, how do things do in a Q4 manner as it pertains to deal periods versus holiday periods or gifting periods, can be a helpful practice in kind of setting, how do I want to set up my budgets down to the keyword level. And then the last thing we want to do here is, that day parting strategy we talked about on a budget level should probably apply to our keyword level as well. So just because I, control budgets saying, don't spend more than 20% of my budget before 6 a.m. That'd be something that I would do on a budget level. I also probably want to throttle my CPMs a little bit more, or my CPCs a little bit more within the day as well, right? And you may see that you see flat performance across the day, but you may also see in several scenarios where, maybe between the hours of 12 and 6, you see much stronger return on ad spend performance or conversion rate performance, right? And really those early hours of the day often have your highest overall cost per clicks. That happens is because people's budgets are resetting at the end of the day. And so as you move into the day, there's increased amount of people who have campaigns and budget because of increased traffic, right, that's coming into the platform. These people are oftentimes running out of budget a little bit earlier into the day than they might in the rest of the year. And so the later hours of the day could be more opportune time if you're a little tighter on budget and want to preserve your cost per click. So really getting into that data analysis on an hourly level can help you preserve budget and make sure you're spending in the times that are going to be the most effective from a conversion perspective for you. In summary, right, we want to just make sure that we're being really intentional with our key strategy, and so that we can capture all the demand that's coming to the platform for. The next level is going to be search terms, right? So taking a step further from the keywords, right? And for some advertisers, you may already have a really well segmented keyword strategy to where you're not picking up a ton of search terms through a phrase match or a broad match. But some you may have just a smaller set of focused keywords, and you're picking up a lot of things through phrase or broad match, right? And so really taking it to the next level and looking at our search terms, it's going to be super important for us to make sure that we have the best performance that we can. And I think this is one of the more opportune areas that you'll have when we're looking at last year's data, right? So the first thing I would look at is, of last year's search terms that we had performance against, how many of, or what's the list of those that I did not have targeted as an exact keyword, and I'm still not targeting it as an exact keyword, right? So if I see, maybe there's 25 search terms last year that I'm still not targeting it as a keyword that had a better than 25% ACoS, right? They were below a 25% ACoS. Well, opportunity search terms, I'm probably not sending as I can against. I'm not as optimized as I can against them, and they're still performing because I don't have them as a direct target. So we would want to take that list before we even get into Q4 and make sure that that's a part of our overall keyword strategy. I think the same thing on the flip side is I would look at things that are either not as a keyword or even are as a keyword as it comes to low performers. What search terms, specifically probably ones that you aren't targeting, are not driving performance, right? Have really high ACoS, aren't driving good conversions, and those can be added as negatives to my strategy. Again, this is probably something I should do before Q4 even starts. Really go back and look at last year, and I would look specifically at 2024 if you have the data versus looking at the last 3 months, because you're often going to see different search terms that start to come up as people start searching for deal keywords, gift keywords at a bit of a higher pace. So really looking at that Q4 2024 data, if we have it, will help us identify both high and low performing search terms that may not exist as keywords, so either add as keywords or negate from our accounts. And then the last point I'd make on this is, while this is a practice I would go through over the next month to make sure we're in a strong place before we head into October, this is also something that we should quickly iterate on, right? So as you get into Q4 and you get into maybe past the Prime Big Deal Day event, I might go back and look at this again and say, okay, so far for the first, half of October, the first 3 weeks of October, what does this look like, right? You'll probably identify some new high performing and low performing search terms that are not existing as keywords. And that's where I can continue to have this as a recurring practice that ideally spans, year round, but specifically in Q4 as lots of new search terms that aren't typically searched throughout the rest of the year start to pop up and can become something that you utilize in your strategy. So that's most of what I have from a advertising perspective. We'll have a little bit more that we'll touch on in terms of identifying opportunities as it comes to advertising when we get to a couple sections from now, but that's most of what we have as we think about specifically on a base level across the three main entity levels of campaigns and budgets, keywords and their bids, and then identifying opportunity search terms. That's where most of that focus should go over the next 30 days as we get prepared for Q4. The next level I want to think about is content optimization. Specifically, I would focus on your deal ASINs. And I think something that's often overlooked is making sure that all of these deal ASINs are in a place where they're retail ready. And what retail ready means, there is Amazon standard benchmarks, right? Where I want to have probably at least 15 reviews. I want to have 4.5 stars. I want to have 5 images, right? I want to have 5 bullet points, have a description, right? Really, that's going to be what Amazon considers standard, but you might have a different level of which you notice where you start to see that, you see performance difference from a conversion rate side as you get more and more content optimized, right? So we would want to make sure that I would go through a practice for every one of your deal ASINs. And that doesn't mean that you necessarily will change anything, but I'd go through a practice over the next month for every one of those ASINs and identify, is there opportunities to improve my content, right? How do my images look? And specifically, I'd look at your secondary images and, think about what a consumer is thinking about as they're shopping for your product, right? If you're a product that could be heavily gifted, I would go in and say, okay, do I have secondary images that speak to, maybe don't directly call out a great gift, but could show someone giving this as a gift, right? Could show the giftability of the product. Could I update my secondary imaging to something more seasonal, right? Specifically for this deal period. So a couple of small things like that could also stand out during this time, right? Are my titles in a good place? Do I have a solid main image? Do I have A+ content entered, right? Those are all small things that can make a big difference on your conversion rate impact, which when, dollars are already tight, even a 1-2% difference in conversion rate can make a big impact on what your top line revenue ends up looking like. The next thing I would look at is making sure that you're in a solid place from your reviews on all of your deal ASINs, right? If you say, hey, this ASIN is a newer launch or it just never picked up many reviews, maybe looking at, an Amazon Vine program or asking past purchasers for reviews is something that you take as an exercise over the next month so that you can build up a solid review count on those deal ASINs. And if you're in a place where, maybe I'm at below 4 stars or I'm really close to 4 stars, and it's an ASIN that I'm planning to promote, maybe we reconsider if that's an ASIN that we want to keep on deal, because as we start to trickle closer and closer to that 4-star mark and getting below that, you're going to see a big conversion rate impacts that we might want to avoid as we get into deal periods, pushing too many dollars behind, right? Maybe we do have a promotion against it, but maybe we don't spend as much and add dollars against it because we're going to see those conversion rate swings based off of reviews. So that's the second thing we want to make sure we're checking on all of these ASINs. And then the third practice I would go about is really optimizing my brand store, right? Because so many people are shopping across such a variety of ASINs, brand stores become a great place to send traffic to from your advertising placements, right? So I could have a sponsored brand ad that goes to my brand store. I could have a sponsored display ad that goes to my brand store. And so I could create a page specifically within my brand store that's going to show all the ASINs I know are on deal. And there are some restrictions that Amazon has about specifically calling it deals or, how I can name the page, but I still can create a place that's my holiday shopping guide or something like that, where I house all of the ASINs that I know are going to be on deal. And then when I send my traffic there, I can get a wider visibility across all of my products, right? If I'm working with earbuds, for an example, right? Maybe I have a $100 pair of earbuds and a $300 pair of earbuds. Well, if someone just searched wireless earbuds, I don't know which one of those brackets that they fall in. So utilizing my brand store and sending my traffic there can help those users find the product that's specifically fit for the market segment that they're in versus having them see, one product and we're hoping that it's the market segment that they're in. I like if I was just advertising a singular ASIN. So that's another great opportunity that you can unlock as more ASINs go on promotion in Q4. The next exercise that I would work through, and I want to put a caveat here that we probably shouldn't just be copying and pasting what we're getting back, but utilizing AI to give us a level of additional insight into our content optimization is something that I think is an interesting practice to take into Q4. All right, so I could give an LLM my ideal ASINs, and you can go through this practice now. You could actually just give it your ASIN, and it'll go through and it can understand what your current content is, right? And then I can ask for, if I was going to optimize this messaging for Q4, what should my updated titles and bullets be? Again, take these as recommendations, not something that I'm going to go through and just make a direct content update on, because it doesn't have product knowledge that you probably do. It doesn't have the market knowledge that you do, but this can help give an additional perspective to something you might not be thinking about and really help you identify some opportunity keywords you might be able to work in, some changes in wording you might be able to work in. And so that's one level that we could work on there. And then the second one is thinking through some of those app opportunities that we were looking at before, having LLMs help us work through our 2024 performance to find opportunity keywords that we might not be identifying could be another practice that we go through. I would lean a little bit more on this first level, but again, really using that as a secondary opinion versus something that we're directly going to go copy and paste into our accounts. Now I want to break down a little bit more into additional opportunities that we have to identify new targets that we can go after within Q4, right? So the first one I want to talk about is share of search. If you have this data back to Q4 of last year, that would be great. That would be ideal. That's the data we want to look at. If you don't have share of search data back to then, capturing current share of search data could still be a great opportunity, right? So I would look at a couple of different levels of share of search. First, I look at across your brand, what was your share of branded search? I see, okay, last year we spent $10,000 across Q4 against branded keywords, and we had a 90% branded share of voice. Great. I probably don't need to put any more dollars than that behind branded search. Or maybe I have a 99% branded share of voice and it's performing really well, but I actually probably could pull a couple of dollars away from that because I'm going to pick up those sales anyway. And we'll talk about that a little bit more on the next slide as well. But maybe I could actually pull a couple of dollars away. Or I may see the other side where I spent 10 grand and I only had a 50% share of search on my branded keywords and I want to put more dollars there. Right? So that'll help us identify, specifically if we have last year's data, where we have opportunities as it pertains to branded from a share perspective, right? And then on the non-branded side, I would really look into what are my top competitors doing, right? So you probably have a lot of your non-branded keywords tracked. Hopefully you can see share of search data for a lot of your non-branded keywords. And if you have that data segment, I can see, okay, I know this competitor is a market leader. They do really well in Q4. Where's their focus at from a keyword perspective? I know they're going to have a similar deal to me. They have similar product features to me. Maybe they're driving more sales from the data that Amazon gives us. I can then go in and say, okay, great. So this keyword, again, it's an earbud. They're really focused on noise cancellation keywords. Well, that's a feature that's important to me. Maybe I can go after a lot of those same keywords that they're performing well on from an advertising perspective as well. So, right, so it can help us protect our brand a little bit more and identify opportunities from our competitors. Right, it can also help identify gaps. Right, so if I see, hey, this is a keyword that's important to me, but last year my share of search was actually really poor on it, right? Even if it wasn't something that was dominated by that same competitor, but it was something that I had a really poor share of search on, and it's something that has performed well for me outside of Q4, then maybe that's something that I need to make sure that from a budget optimization perspective, I'm pushing more dollars against as it comes to the holiday periods. And then if we have that last year's data, this will allow us to identify higher intent keywords, right? So if there's keywords that are related to giving a gift, bestseller, right? If someone's looking at best headphones for gifts or, or gifts for X person, right? T-shirts to gift men, right? Those type of segments, while they're still going about product discovery, they're often going to be higher intent from like an immediate conversion perspective, because we know that they're looking for a gift. So they're going to be converting over the next, maybe 2 weeks, because they're trying to make a immediate purchase, especially as you get closer to the actual holiday season, where people are trying to make a more immediate purchase to drive that sale. So if we have data on these keywords and what our share of search is, this can help us identify, in these high intent keywords, what was our performance like last year and how can we go again and make gains against those a little bit further. All right, the next is going to be search query performance. So this is only going to be available if you're a 3P seller. If you're a 1P brand, unfortunately, SQP data isn't something that's available, but we can still rely on share of search to get a couple of similar insights. The really big thing that I'd focus on for search query data is that same gap analysis that we talked about before, right? If I know that there's a keyword that I do well on and I go look at Q4 of last year and I see, hey, I only had 0.05% or 0.5% of the impression share on that keyword, I'd actually go down the funnel a little bit and see what was my purchase share, right? If my purchase share is higher than my impression share is, that means I'm out converting what my category is, right? Especially if it's higher than like my click share. And so that means that customers relate to that your product a little bit more on that keyword than they do the rest of the category. So that could be an opportunity for me to make more gains against that keyword from an advertising perspective and know that I'm going to have a stronger conversion rate. The same thing with those deal type keywords, right? If people are searching up, best things to gift, things on deal, right? And you're going to have deals or fit that gifting category. Again, you could look at what is your impression share versus your purchase share. And if that purchase share is higher, you probably speak to that a little bit more from a customer's perspective, at least last year. And those can then help you identify, again, on things that are low impression volume, where should I push more dollars? And the third thing I would look at is your branded insights from last year, right? So maybe again, I saw that I had a 90% advertised share of voice, but what was my purchase rate looking like from a brand unbranded keyword specifically, right? What percentage of the purchase shares did I have when people searched for AirPods, right? If I was Apple, getting down to that level can help me identify, do I need to put more dollars behind branded? Can I put less dollars behind branded? How much is organic complementing that, right? If organic sales have a 50% share of search, from a purchase perspective, then maybe I don't need to push as many ad dollars there. So really getting down to that keyword level can help me make some of that identification. And the last thing I would do is look at this on an ASIN level, right? Really go through each of your deal ASINs and identify where those opportunities and gaps might be so that you can have coverage against all of those ASINs. The same thing that we did from a content perspective. Let's break through these down one by one and make sure that we have a solid keyword strategy for each, based off of our historical data that we talked about, as well as identifying gap analysis from past promotional events. Right. The last thing I would talk about here, and there's not a slide for this as it pertains to an opportunity though, is really leaning into AMC audiences. So within Q4, right, things are really competitive. So we want to make sure that we're going after those highest intent shoppers. So people are probably like adding a lot of things to list, right, or adding a lot of things to cart, especially during like a Black Friday period. Well, what I can do then after that period is I can come in and I can capture an audience of everybody who's added a product to cart or added a product to list and has not purchased yet, or even viewed my product page and hasn't purchased, whatever I want to look at. And then I can then utilize that audience to bid boost on my sponsored product and sponsored brand campaigns. So what that means is if someone's viewed my product before and added it to cart, but they haven't yet purchased from me, and they're searching a non-branded keyword still, which means they're still in the purchase cycle for my category, I'm going to spend 20% more for that user than I would. And that 20% rate is just something that I'm saying, but that could be less or more, 20% more for that user than I would someone who is not added to cart, because I know this user is a higher intent for my product because they took an action that shows that they have an interest in purchase. They showed an intent to purchase for my product. So this can make sure that of those users that have taken the next step but not quite gotten to a purchase, that if they are re-entering the purchase cycle within my product category, that we're really making sure that those users are seeing ads from us every time they come back and search. So that's another high leverage opportunity that I'd make sure that you're taking advantage of, specifically in Q4, as users are coming back and shopping and deal hunting a little bit more deeply than they might be throughout the rest of the year. Lastly, I would just talk about building your data stack for Q4, right? So if you don't currently have all of the data stack that we kind of just talked through to do some of that analysis already, then I would take September to make sure that you have a solid plan in place so that as data signals start to come in, right? Maybe you can't go look at Q4 data from last year, but as data signals start to come in, you can start to make optimizations on those different levels that we talked through pretty rapidly as one point. And two, as we move into, there's going to be another Q4, there'll be next year, right? That will have those data signals and data that we own that we can come back and refer to, in 2026 to make those optimizations on the same level that we've talked through today if we don't have that data for last year already. It's not something that we want to just make gut adjustments against, right? We want to make sure that we're making data-driven decisions within the quarter, because we're going to see that budgets are shifting quickly, CPCs are going to spike. That's going to be variable by timeframes, right? So we want to make sure that we have hourly data, we have keyword search term level data, we have search query performance data, share of voice data, right? All of that into one place. Knowing where you're losing market share, knowing where you're losing share of search is really going to be critical. And your time is going to be pretty compressed, right? Someone, especially as we get to second half of November, first half of December, right? If you wait a week to make an optimization on a keyword, you probably lost a pretty large segment of people who have now already purchased within your category because they were on a time crunch to make that purchase, right? Versus the rest of the year when people aren't deal shopping, when people aren't shopping for gifting, they have whatever time horizon they deem for themselves to make that purchase versus the pressure to purchase in a deal period or purchase for a gifting session, right? So we want to make sure that we have daily data signals coming back to us so that we can make those optimizations quickly, whether that's on an hourly level, across the campaign, across the based off of a share of search, whatever that might be. So this is all of the data that I would make sure that we're capturing, right? So the first is going to be the sponsored ads and DSP data down to the campaign and search term level. Make sure we have that in a solid place. Make sure we have our share of voice data, market share data from search query performance. We have an AMC data set. We have our retail data coming in, right? So we're not just looking at data in a silo as it pertains to ads, but we're layering in, based off how much I've spent on each product, what does the total sales look like? What does my inventory look like, right? Because I might see that this product's running low on inventory, and maybe want to pace back my my sale, pace back my ad spend, right, to account for that. Does this ASIN have a promo, right? How is that promo affecting top line sales? How does that affect ad performance? Do I have any buy box issues? Have I seen big swings in my BSR, right? And how is that affecting my ads? If I see a product goes from 5th bestseller rank to 1st bestseller rank, maybe I want to push more dollars there, right? So having all of those signals to quickly reference will allow you to be agile within the quarter so that you can make sure that you're bringing in the strong performance and capitalizing off of the influx of users that are coming in. Again, I just add on to that, the things that we'll be able to do off of that, right, is forecast for Q4. If we have historical data, if I have last year's data, you'll be able to forecast for Q4 to model what your demand is going to look like across the season, right? Or what's your demand going to look like in October? What's it going to look like on Black Friday, et cetera? And have insight from those competitive signals that we saw from share of search and search query performance data to identify other opportunities that we have to potentially scale past that forecast that we saw last year. We can then optimize in real time on a daily level to make sure that we're capturing campaigns that are going out of budget and increasing the budget against them, campaigns that are overspending and decreasing the budget against them, right? And taking into account things like retail data as well, making adjustments on deals, things that are having inventory issues, buy box issues, what we talked about on the last slide as well. So with that connected data stack, you won't have to be as reactive, right? And you can start anticipating things that are coming for Q4 before they happen, or be quick to react when they are happening versus waiting on data to come back from Amazon several days after those changes have happened. If you don't currently have a plan for capturing that data, just a quick plug to Intentwise is that something that we can certainly help you with. So if you're like, hey, that's a gap for me, I need to make sure that I have a data infrastructure in place. Reach out to us. We'd be happy to have a conversation. We can help you across all of those journeys, from collecting your data, enriching your data, helping you get clean visuals so that you can quickly act on your data, and then helping you take that next action step on your data as well. So that's most of what I have today. I think in summary, I would kind of wrap up with a couple of key points, right? Let's make sure I go through over this next month and kind of make sure we're hitting on each of these key topics. The first one is going to be, we're going through and reviewing across all of our different entity levels and ads, right? I'm going through and reviewing my campaigns, my keywords, my search terms to find opportunities from last year's data if I have that. I'm going through and reviewing things on an hourly level to see when am I running out of budget, when am I seeing the best performance, and how can I push more spend there. I'm going to go through all my deal ASINs and check myself for retail readiness, whether that's my images, whether that's my titles and bullets, reviews, and then building out brand store pages against those as well. I'm going to go review competitive data like share of search and SQP data to make sure that I have a solid base as it contains to my competitors. I've identified any gaps that I might have in my keyword strategy, and I filled those before the quarter starts. And then I'm going to have a solid data infrastructure set up so that I know as signals come in, I can quickly iterate and act on them so that I'm not losing any of the sales opportunity that comes within the fourth quarter. Now I'll pause here. We're going to open this up for any questions that you guys might have. Please feel free to throw those in the chat and I'll stick on as long as you guys have any questions. If you have any questions past today, do we have any insights regarding how shopper behavior might change in Q4 this year due to the economy? That's a great question. I think we saw this in Prime Day. I don't have any specific signals quite yet as it pertains to Q4, but what we saw in Prime Day, and I think what's going to be similar here, is people were really focused on those deal periods, right? I think a lot of advertisers who saw success during Prime Day were ones who actually ran their deals for an extended time past Prime Day because people were really focused on getting that discount. And even within the Prime Days periods, right, you saw very increased focus on deal shopping between competitors to make sure they're getting the best prices for the features that are being delivered. Right? So that's always the signals as it comes to a deal period. But I think you're going to see even more users push to those deal periods. So more users in October, big deal days, more users in Black Fridays because people are increasingly price sensitive. Right? So making sure that we're really focused on those ASINs that are on deal, I think is going to be increasingly important. But I also think there'll be increased levers for things like competitor targeting because people are going to be shopping around quite a bit, making sure that they're getting the best value for the dollars that they're spending. So I think that's the biggest signal that I would focus on is more users compressing into those deal periods versus maybe, versus seeing a throttle back in spend. I haven't seen anything that suggests that. We still, that July didn't see any, main throttle back in spend. So that I wouldn't anticipate, but I think really honing in on those deal periods will be pretty important for most advertisers. If you have anything, please feel free to still throw those in there, and I'll stick on for another 30 seconds or so. But as you guys are throwing those in there, again, just want to quickly encourage you guys to join the Intentwise community if you didn't grab that link earlier. That's another great place to, we're doing these webinars all the time. We have webinars most weeks. So it's another great place to just stay up to date with, what's happening in Intentwise, what's happening in the industry, what, upcoming events and webinars do we have. So we really encourage you guys to jump in there. And that's another great place to ask your questions. If you don't want to reach out to me individually, you can ask your questions there. And there's lots of people in the industry, both on the brand side, the agency side, that can help, give some insights from a seller's perspective or an agency's perspective to the specific questions that you guys might have as well. I appreciate you all taking the time today. Please feel free to reach out with anything else. And I hope you guys have a great rest of your week and a great holiday weekend. Thanks, everyone.